Hello, this is Randy, and welcome back to Brain Break. I wanted to tell you another story about my wife's Uncle Jim. Now, he was one of our favorites and just an amazing man. When we first moved here back in '86 to the Valley of the Sun, we lived in Mesa. They lived in Tempe, which was the next town over. At that time, Tempe and Mesa did not touch. I was made the Young Men's President, a position I'd held in El Paso, Texas, where we moved from. The ward that we moved into had not been holding monthly firesides, which may not be a thing now, but back then it was. So I invited Debbie's aunt and uncle to come and speak to the youth about being great kids and what life was going to hold for them. The topic they came up with, and I can't remember if I assigned it or they just came up with it, but it was wonderful. It was, I wish I knew then what I know now. They talked with examples from their own lives of learning to be parents, learning that the gospel is true, or their testimonies of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They were able to talk about how things had changed in their profession. At that time, both of them were working. My wife's uncle, as I said, was a professor at ASU. He was an incredible professor. He was also the first bishop, I believe, the first bishop of the young single adult ward they had at ASU. My wife's aunt is just an incredible person. She worked as the secretary for a outdoor equipment company, and it was fascinating to get to know her under those circumstances because I'd met her, but I didn't get to know her as well until she started talking about herself. I knew her kids, and her kids were amazing, all four of them. I just loved them to death. But what was so fun was hearing this topic and then watching the kids visit with them after the fireside was over. Firesides back in the day lasted 45 minutes or so. And then we had refreshments, and then Debbie's aunt and uncle departed. That night, and again at Mutual, and again the following Sunday, hearing the positive comments these people had about the topic. And I'm not talking just the kids, also the adults, the other advisors for the young men and the young women, the scout leaders, the bishopric. They were all impressed. And I was thinking to myself, well, how am I going to top this next month? So it was really incredible. I was grateful to be able to be part of that. But I guess the question I would have for all of you is, what would you have done different? Keith and I were talking earlier. In my own case, financially, there are a lot of decisions I wish I'd have made differently. Like, for instance, I sold some stock that I had in Procter & Gamble from working there. It was free stock, didn't cost me a thing, but I was able to sell it for $1,650, and I used that to buy my wife a car. Now, we needed a car, that's for sure, but I'm not sure that was the best way to get the money. Now, at that time, I wanted to stay out of debt, but I recently did research on what that $1,650 would be worth in the intervening 38 years. Any guesses? $149,000. Wow. I really could use that money now instead of the 1,650 back then. Another example is when I was in college, I was servicing swimming pools. There was a barn on the property. This was out in the county in Tucson, Arizona, out in Pima County. And there was a man that had a barn, and I questioned him, what's the barn? Because he didn't have horses or cows or anything. I'm sure they'd been on that property. The barn wasn't brand new. He said, "You never seen inside my barn?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, come on, let's go take a look." Inside that barn, he had about 40 Mustangs, the Ford motor car. These were fun cars. Some were fully restored and worth quite a bit. Others were just running. They all ran. They were all licensed. He offered to sell me one for $800 because he liked me. Now, as a dummy, because I was pretty short-sighted at this point, I turned him down. My wife and I talked about it. So, oh, that's not a great investment. We don't need another car. I could kick myself. It wasn't but a couple of years later that that same car I would have paid $800 for and maybe cleaned it up a little bit, washed it. I don't know what else I would have had to do to it. Not much. It would have been worth $5,000 to $10,000 or more. If I'd have hung on to it for a few more years, probably $15,000 or $20,000. It's just one of those things. If I'd have known then what I know now. I used to be in the food business about 4 years when I lived in El Paso and here in Mesa, and I worked for Procter & Gamble Food Service and Lodging Products Division. When I lived in El Paso, I met a guy that he decided he didn't like me because he didn't like my predecessor with Procter & Gamble. My predecessor was a little stiff, but this guy and I became pretty good friends. His name was Roberto. Very interesting man. Mother was Mexican. Father was Chinese. He was born in the United States, but raised in Juarez, Mexico. His family owned a Chinese restaurant over there, which was one of the best ones. At one point, I believe we'd already moved back to Mesa. He contacted me and asked me if I would invest $5,000, which I had, in a restaurant that he and his family were opening up. And again, my wife and I looked at that and just said, that's a lot of money. With that investment, I would never have to work another day in my life. They have opened up 6 of those restaurants, and they're huge, 2 to 3 stories each. I would have given up some vacation time over the last few years to earn my way in. One thing I learned about this family of Chinese restaurants is they put their money in. They also ate at the restaurant regularly, paid full price to make sure that the food was good and that the service was amazing. And it was. These guys were incredible. Roberto is still somebody I try and stay in touch with, though I could kick myself for making those mistakes. So I guess my comment to you is, don't make a short, quick decision when it comes to investing money. It doesn't always have to be invested in the stock market. Sometimes it can be just buy and hold, or just hold, like in the Procter & Gamble example, or it can be something unique. I could go on and tell you other stories from other people's lives, but I think that tells you the story that I wanted to get across. So if I knew then what I know now, none of us ever will, but 2020 hindsight is always amazing. I wish I'd have been a little bit more daring and a little bit more risky. It would have paid off. Thank you for joining me for Brain Break with Randy and Keitho, and I hope you have a great night. Bye now.